Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to our talk, How to Be Kinder to Yourself at Work. Again, we're so happy that you're here today. Um, Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you want to, you can also you can also share how you're feeling today. Yeah, hello everyone. So again, this talk is organized by Calm Collective, and we are on a mission to normalize mental health conversations in Asia, both for the communities and the workplaces. So I'm Eos, the head of operations here at Calm Collective, where I manage all things operational. So mostly the programs for the communities and the workplaces. And today we're going to be discussing a topic that I think all of us can relate to. Often work demands us to be hyper productive every second of the day. We can be especially hard on ourselves when we make mistakes, or like just don't meet deadlines. For many, including myself, I think our initial reaction is to beat ourselves up, assuming that self-criticism will motivate us to do better. But did you know that actually being kind to yourself is more helpful than beating yourself up? And I can't wait to dive deeper into this topic with the wonderful people of Calm Collective, who will share their vast experience of being unkind or kind to themselves. Sabrina, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Sure, thanks, EOS. So I'm Sabrina. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Calm Collective Asia, and yeah, I'm really excited to be talking about how to be kind to myself, kinder to myself at work, because it's something that I still find that I struggle with from time to time, even though I've gotten a lot better at it. Um, so yeah, I'm just keen to hear from both of you as well as to share some of my strategies that I've leaned on, especially during tougher times where my inner critic can be quite loud.
Thanks, Sabrina. Clarice.
Thanks, Eos. Thanks, Serenas. Hi, everyone. I'm Clarice. I do content marketing here at Calm Collective, where I manage all things content from our website to our blog to the things that you see on social media. And I think being kind, this topic is really important to me because I too also have like this really harsh inner critic, and it's something that I've been trying to work on. And hopefully, through this talk, I'll be able to inspire and empower some of you to just be a bit kinder to yourself as well.
Thanks for that. So before we jump in, I just want to remind everyone that the Q&A is open. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A function. Let's jump in. So with so many things going on in our lives, right? Self-kindness, I think, is a value that is super overlooked. And I'm curious to know what your personal relationships are with self-kindness, Clarice and Sabrina. Could you share what being kind to yourself means to you? And perhaps, if you're comfortable, only if you're comfortable, share some maybe juicy personal anecdotes about being kind to yourself. Yeah. Sabrina, why don't you go first?
Okay. So what being kind to myself means is I think a lot of it is really about being able to be aware of the times where I'm not being kind to myself. So that self awareness is really important. And from there, it's really about okay, how can I reframe either my thoughts or the feelings that are coming up to one where it's a little bit more productive, to one that's a little bit more compassionate. And I guess oftentimes, well, I think one of the moments where this showed up or shows up a lot is where at work when I have way too many things to do. I'm a person who tends to say yes to a lot of things, as you all would know, both of you would know. Um, I can get quite harsh on myself when I overstretch myself and realize that, okay, all these 10 things that I wanted to do today, I can only do maybe three or four or two, right? And then at the end of the day, I find that I'm like telling myself, oh, Sabrina, you could have done all of those things. Why didn't you do it? You're letting people down. You're a disappointment to yourself and to all the other people that you promised to do these things to. I don't know if that's very juicy, but I think that happens to a lot of us, and this is something that I still face on a daily basis. So the way that I practice self-kindness in that scenario is, um, yeah, I really just allow myself to take a step back and say, "Hey, Sabrina, you're just doing your best each day." I think recognizing that I am doing my best, whatever that looks like for the day, has been really important in practicing that self kindness. And another thing is also actually something that's a bit more firm and not so gentle, kind of like kind. Is that I also have learned to say no to more things. I realized that I have this tendency also to people please or to say yes. So part of being kind to myself is also about saying like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, that's not important. No, I can do this next week or next year.
Thanks for that. I think I really resonated when you were talking about what are the unkind things that you say to yourself. Yeah, you're a disappointment. Why didn't you do that? And there's a lot of blame. And I think, yeah, everybody, um, yeah, I think everybody can really relate to that. How about you, Cloris? What does kindness mean to you? And what is your story with being kind to yourself at work?
So for me, like being kind to myself, as cliche as it might sound, is kind of like reminding myself that I'm only like a human being, and being able to relate to myself in ways that are like forgiving and accepting, especially when situations may not be like so ideal or like so optimal. And I think a big part of it is also like respecting my own time and energy. I think that's a huge thing. And then like essentially treating myself as like how I would treat my friends, even though like, it's not the most instinctive thing to do. Like, okay, it's very easy for me to say to my friends like, oh hi, it's okay, like you don't have to, be so harsh on yourself. But then it's not as easy to do that for myself. Yeah. And then like in terms of like personal anecdotes, I think if I'm being honest, like thinking back and as far as I can remember, um, I don't think I've been the kindest to myself ever since I was like young, like since I was in like primary school, secondary school. I've always had this like very prominent fear of like not being good enough, or like fear of being a disappointment, which I think you guys also shared. Um, and if I ever tell myself like, okay, I'm doing great, like, yeah, no, you're just lying to yourself. Yeah, so I think these thought patterns naturally spilled to like the workplace. Um, since I had it since I was young. And then like that's where I found myself being even harsher at work, because like there's kind of like quote unquote more at stake, right? So like being a student, if I messed up, like what's the worst that can happen? I'm only affecting my own grades. Um, or like at school, there's only like maybe only my lecturers can see my work. But then like in the workplace, there are so many more eyeballs that are there to like judge. So I also feel like, because it's work, like I need to know everything. So that's where like the harsh inner critic comes in. Yeah. And then, like being a fresh graduate, like this, like not having as much experience, sometimes I would like beat myself up over things that I like, don't know, or like simply just not thinking in a certain way. Then that leads to like, overthinking or like over scrutinizing the things that I do. Like, then I would then spend like a lot of unnecessary time or energy trying to get to a point where I'm satisfied. But then if you are in that headspace, you know that, you will never be satisfied. Like that's the truth. So sometimes I think even though like after all this scrutiny, there are still a lot of errors and areas for improvement. So we need to recognize that, maybe it's time to take a step back and like see things from the outside. Because like when you're in that state of mind, it's just not the most like optimal situation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really agree. So maybe you can share what were the repercussions. So when you caught yourself being unkind to yourself, what did you experience? Did you experience like burnout, um, or did you like experience any physical symptoms or mental health, or like mental breakdowns, for example?
Mm,
Yeah. Clarice, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I think it was like a vicious cycle of like self-hatred and like lowered self-esteem, I feel. Because
Mm.
there was a lot of like downplaying of my own achievements, or like undermining my own abilities. So overall, just constantly questioning myself, am I good? Am I good enough? Am I doing enough? Am I doing good enough? So like on bad days, like I would wake up feeling like super anxious. Like physically, I would just feel my heart thumping and like tightness in my chest. So that were like the physical symptoms of like being unkind to myself. So when I got to that point, it was so bad. I felt like, oh my god, I can't even drink my favorite cup of coffee. That was when was like, okay, I need to do something about it. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that so vulnerably. Sabrina, you were gonna say something.
No, I was going to say, kind of start off with, when we're not kind to ourselves, that's usually coming from a place where, um, our thoughts and feelings come up, right? It's from the mind, but it's really interesting that these feelings of like not being good enough also translate into the bodily reactions. Of it translates physiologically. So for me, when I find that I'm not being kind to myself, what that could mean is that I might be taking on too much, overstretching myself, to the point of potentially burnout, right? And what that can feel like is it could feel like just having a like overall low mood where I'm just like, oh, what's the point of doing anything? I don't want to do this anymore. um, but at the same time there's this overall feeling of like heaviness in my body as well, and it's just hard to get things moving when I'm not kind to myself. I think similar to Chloris, it can also, in certain times, at certain points in my life, it can also kind of turn into depression, like depression or anxiety symptoms, and that can, usually for me, it looks like maybe a stomach ache first if I'm feeling anxious about something, or my appetite's just, not great, or I've also thrown up. Actually, I've fainted as well. It's not great. So sometimes what I've realized is um, that those thoughts of like self-criticism and like just like you beating up yourself and all that can actually turn into these physical symptoms, and oftentimes, when I'm like trying to seek help or treatment, I focus on the physical symptoms, but in fact it might be something more mental or emotional in nature. So I like that point that Cloris brought up around how these thought patterns actually surface from childhood, right? And I think it's been a process of being able to identify and unpack all of those thought patterns, those feelings attached to it, where in the process of like just being kinder to myself.
Thanks for that. And it's perfect segue to my next point, where I wanted to ask you about where does this ideas of being unkind to ourselves come from, right? Is it from childhood? Is it from people of authority in our lives? I remember I had a teacher who told me that, yeah, your writing's useless. Your writing's really bad, or and that affected me for a really long time. Okay, he didn't use useless, but he just said that, yeah, you cannot make it. Yeah, Singaporean teachers like to say that, like, you cannot make it. And I think that really affected me for a really long time. So on my next point, I do want to unpack this idea of self-kindness or being unkind to ourselves. What are these misconceptions? So some of these misconceptions are: being kind to yourself means that you are lazy. Being kind to yourself means that you're weak, or you're self-indulgent, or you just want to live a hedonistic life full of pleasures, right? So why are these misconceptions so prominent? Clarice?
Okay. Uh, I think from my point of view, I think it also stems from like culture. Like maybe our parents' generation. Um, like there's a lot of hard work that they need to put in, like like putting food on the table and all, and then there's a lot less like emphasis on taking care of your mental health because there's just like so much worry, and then maybe it just kind of like passed down from that generation where like, okay, I don't have time to take care of myself. I just need to put food on the table. I need to feed my kids. I need to feed my family. And then if I ever take a break for myself, then, maybe the world is going to collapse, in that sense. So I feel like that's kind of where it came from. Like I still even see it from in my parents, where I mean they're in their like 50s, 60s, and I feel like they can kind of like slow down in life, but then they are not really doing that because they feel like, they just need to keep going and going. And then when I said, hey mom, hey dad, I think it's time for you guys to take a break. It's okay. You don't have to, do this all by yourself. You can ask someone to help you. I can help you. But they're just like, oh no, it's not so easy. Like I need to do this by myself because like if not, then people are gonna think that, I can't, like I'm the boss, like I can't do this. Yeah. So I feel like it stems from like just culturally and like things that they experience. Mm.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I think that a culture of being unkind to ourselves has just been normalized. We're so used to hearing each other say, like, you know, I was staying up all night to finish at work and I only slept 2 hours. It's even become a badge of honor, right? When we're not kind to ourselves. Um, and like, yeah, like the teacher criticized me, I'm gonna get back at them, the kind of thing. I'm gonna work my ass off and just yeah, like work till I burn out, but I'll still get the A, right? So, um, yeah, I think just building upon what Cloris said, it's very much it's a very like the being unkind to ourselves is just so prevalent in our environment, in our culture, that I think at the heart of it, it's really about like how can we undo all of that and find our way to just being kind to ourselves, and doing so is just really about being a better friend to ourselves. But yeah, sorry, you were talking about misconceptions.
No, I love that point. So I think going back to that, it's also learned behavior, isn't it? We think back of about all the times that we were unkind to ourselves and the results were positive. So then we attribute, okay, if I want positive results, I have to be unkind to myself. But then we don't stop to think about, okay, how about all the times that I was kind to myself and the results were even more positive, right? So I think it's really trying to break that, um, I think break that stigma of being kind to ourselves, um, yeah, within ourselves, right? And I think understanding the misconceptions. So for example, there's are you self-kind, are you being kind or are you being indulgent, right? Um, does it mean that if you, uh, does that mean if you are kind to yourself, you won't be productive? That's not necessarily true. You can be both kind to yourself and productive, right? And in fact, there are different ways to showcase this, uh, to showcase how you can be kind to yourself. So there's the softer and the more tender way of doing it, and then there's a fiercer way of doing it, right? So Sabrina, maybe you can elaborate on that, the yin and the yang of self-kindness and self-compassion.
Yeah, sure. So I think when we talk about being kind to ourselves, it's oftentimes we think that, oh, you're being kind to yourself, that's just being weak, especially, given the context of the environment that we operate in, right? Um, so, I mean, when we think about kindness, I think it's really important to recognize that it doesn't only look like, being gentle with yourself, saying things like, oh, it's okay, you can just postpone that, maybe you shouldn't do this. But it also looks like being strong or being firm, right? Drawing your boundaries, asserting yourself, standing up for yourself. Kristen Neff, this psychologist in the US, she's got this concept around mindfulness, self-compassion, and in that teaching, she covers the yin and yang, or the like tender and fierce sides of self-compassion. So on the tender side of things, I think that's what we commonly know as what kindness looks like. But then on the more fierce or firm or yang side of compassion, that's really it. What it looks like is that, yeah, you're able to stand up for yourself when you need a promotion, or if you want to raise. It's about telling someone off if they have overstepped your boundaries. So all of that is part and parcel of being kind to yourself. And I think in this culture or this society that we operate in, I think that's something that we can embrace a bit more.
Thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, so I guess then my next question would be more relevant, um, more how do I say this? Um, yeah, sorry, more relevant for workplaces, right? I think a lot of our audience would like to learn about how can they balance being kind to themselves while meeting the demands of work, right? Because sometimes the reality is that we have pressure from possibly from the top management, right? Okay, we want the results now. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose rest, or are you going to choose to chong the whole night, right? Yeah, so in the topic of kindness in the workplace, maybe Cloris, how has self-kindness affected your ability to do work?
I think without self-kindness, I'll probably be like a constant ball of mess and worry, just fumbling around, rolling here and there, getting nowhere, you know. But on a serious note, I think self-kindness has allowed me, okay, to a certain extent, because I'm still a work in progress, but has allowed me to take a step back and look at my weakness and my mistakes, without having to feel like my self-worth is being threatened. So like in a way, when I'm kinder to myself, I'm able to adopt this growth mindset much better at work and say like, okay, you know, instead of saying, oh, I'm so stressed, I can't do this, like, you know, is this all that I can handle? You're so weak, you shouldn't be this hard, it shouldn't be this hard. So I would like try and switch that around and say like, oh, this is a moment of challenge, this feels uncomfortable, what am I feeling right now? What can I do to counter these feelings so that I can, you know, get through these and do it again? Because this is nothing new, you know, you've been through it like just one step at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Cloris. Yeah, and I really agree. I think being unkind to yourself can be very paralyzing when you're stuck in that loop, like feedback loop of self-criticism, and then you don't really feel very good. Um, yeah, how about you, Sabrina? How has the practice of self-kindness affect your ability to do your work?
Yeah, so I think earlier on, Eos, you were mentioning how there's that tension between being kind to yourself and also, I guess, achieving, right? Between being kind and getting to meet all your goals and, work during like a busy period. I think it's really, really hard to practice kindness, especially when there's so many deliverables, so many deadlines coming your way, right? Oftentimes we're just like, okay, we'll just put our heads down and just get through it, push through it. And some of us might break, some of us might make it, but it's just us still being quite unkind to ourselves. Um, so I think the way that I've definitely found myself in that situation multiple times, and what has helped is that taking a step back and really prioritizing what really needs to be done versus what can be done later has been really helpful for me. I think oftentimes when we're so busy, it feels like I need to do everything right now, right? And that's when you start getting worried, you start feeling a bit anxious, and that's where you're most at risk to having that inner critic take over. Like, it can be a tsunami, right? So what I find helps me a lot is that I don't know if you're familiar with the 2x2, the urgent versus important, that framework. So what I do is I kind of put all of the things that's on my plate just up, like, out there. It helps a lot to list it out, to just see like, why the heck am I feeling so overwhelmed, right? Just to see everything. And then what helps me is that then I will then kind of like put them in different buckets. What do I need to do now? What can I do later? What can I not do at all? What can I delegate? I think one of the things I've found to be really hard for me is that I find it hard to ask for help proactively. So this kind of exercise actually helps me realize that, oh, okay, maybe EOS can help me with this, or hey, Cloris, can you help me with that instead? Or maybe we don't have to do it all together, right? Um, so I think that's helped a lot in helping myself be kinder to myself, prioritization, being able to take a step back. Um, yeah, that's a big one for me right now.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so I think to summarize your points, being kind to yourself is it first, I guess, like acknowledging that you have limited energy, right? It's not being unrealistic. Being kind to yourself means that you have to be realistic too. That you have this limited energy, and then you would need to prioritize your task, your long task list, right? And then secondly, being kind to yourself also means that you can it's easier for you to reach out for help. You don't have to do things alone, right? Yeah, so So I think on my next point, right, I'm also hearing that self-kindness actually has a lot of benefits to a person. And as I was researching, I came across a few studies that I'd love to share. So these studies were studies on companies that practiced kindness. So a Canadian study found that kindness can actually increase productivity and satisfaction. Employees who are respectful and kind to each other, who practice kindness at work, um, actually have 26% more energy, which translates to productivity, 36% more satisfaction with your work, which also translates to retention and productivity, right? And 44% more commitment to their organization. And this is huge numbers, right? And then in another study by Stanford, they also found that kind leaders actually make kinder employees, and organizations that practice kindness were more likely to attract kinder applicants, therefore improving the whole culture of the company. So, so my next question would then be, because of these benefits that everybody should try to achieve or pursue, how can we build this culture of kindness at work? Maybe let's start from a personal, like what can you do as an employee to build this culture of kindness at work? Sabrina?
Okay. So, I mean, I think, yeah, the best way to build that culture is, by walking the talk through everyday actions. So, um, like to me, what we've done at Calm Collective, or as a leader or as a manager, I am very intentional about bringing in moments of like just reminding ourselves to be kind to each other, being kind to the other person through simple check-ins. So for example, when we start our team meetings, it's really about being very intentional about asking each other, how are you, how are you feeling, let's talk a little bit more about how your current bandwidth or your current state is, because I think when you're able to start from that point of curiosity and also compassion, that helps you also see the other person as also human, just like you, right? And with that in mind, recognizing your colleagues as not just people who have to get stuff done, but as fellow humans, that actually helps you, yeah, be a lot kinder to them, and to be a lot more, to also create that psychologically safe space for them to be kind to themselves and also to bring up or surface any difficulties or challenges that they may have. I think one of the things that we brought up earlier on was around asking for help, and that's actually a key strategy to being kind to oneself at work or even in your personal life. So I think when you foster that culture of kindness, then that's actually the first stepping stone to helping people ask for help. Right? So when you make them feel safe to do so, then only then can you do so. So yeah, I think on an individual level, asking questions during meetings, little I think little things in our communication day to day also goes a long way. Whether it's like sending a question out that's more personal in nature on our Slack channels, or when we're writing to people, just saying, hey, I thought of you today, and just send them something a bit more personal in nature also helps foster that kindness within your communications and community and all the people that you work with.
Thanks for that. And actually, I wanted to add on, Sabrina, one of the things that you do very well is at the start of the days, when you're not feeling at your best, you let us know immediately. So then that helps us to uh, manage our expectations also as employees, right? Okay, how else can I help you? And then as an employee, I also feel like, okay, my leader is walking the talk. So when my turn came, when I needed help, sorry, um, when I wasn't feeling my best, I could tell her, okay, I'm not feeling my best, but these are the things that need to be done, right? So actually, really fostering that psychologically safe culture, and each of us doing our part. Of course, the caveat is that you have a leader who practices it, right? But it's sometimes difficult when your leader doesn't practice it. So maybe Cloris, what would you do as an employee if let's say your boss isn't as kind?
I think that's a good question, because I do recognize that, maybe perhaps not many people have like such a great environment to work in, and I personally have had that kind of experience before in the past. So I think what would really help is to, with your boss aside, but just reading the rest of your colleagues, your peers, make kindness a norm, because like we are all, if let's say you don't have like a nice boss, then we are all going through the same thing. We are all like, kind of quote unquote taking the same shit. So like make kindness a norm, be more intentional and proactive when it comes to being kind to others. So like I think one thing that I really take away from working from Calm Collective, and I bring it to my friends as well, is just really asking how are you, what's one thing you're grateful for today. And it really cultivates that kind of like energy, like what Seb was saying, like I'm human being. Yeah, and I think it's just all in all, it's just to pass that good energy, good juju around, and it will come back to you. And I think like a huge thing that really helps like for me is to remind myself that, okay, so every day I'm trying my best, but then my best will look different. So like maybe on a good day I can give 100%, but then if let's say I'm not feeling too good today, I only have 40% in me, then I'll give 40%. And that's fine, because like our best looks different every day. So then if we can remind our colleagues that that's the case also, then I think we can all just be kinder to ourselves and to everyone else at work. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to just like add on, like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
go
putting
ahead.
myself into the shoes of someone who, like maybe an employee who's working in a culture or work culture where it's a lot harsher, it's very busy, and I think a lot of industries are like that, right? Just because of the nature of the work, and how things have been, right? Um, so I think in that scenario, being kind to yourself also looks like being able to stand up for yourself, being able to draw boundaries, but also doing that in a way that's kind and respectful. Because I think a lot of the time people might be like, oh, I'll go to the whistleblower and like, tell on my boss or whatever, which sometimes is not the kindest thing to do, right? So I think there are many kind ways to be kind to yourself, by maybe just saying that, like, hey boss, if you want me to do this thing, then I will not be able to do that other thing. Which shall I focus on, right? Just being able to be very firm about that and communicating your needs and communicating your own parameters. Very important. Um, I think another thing is also, I think in more busy work environments, oftentimes we work through lunch, we might skip our breaks, we might just, work 10, 12-hour days or more. So it's like in that kind of scenario, it's important to actually carve out those breaks for yourself and just say like, hey, being kind to myself means I just need this 15 minutes to go take a walk in the middle of the day, or I just need that half an hour to take a quick lunch break. That's a non-negotiable. So I think, yeah, I think it's also about really standing your ground, and being aware of what you need in order to not just be kind to yourself, but also to be able to do your best work and to put your best foot forward, during the workday.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really uh like your tip of telling your boss like, okay, if you want me to do this, I can't do that. It's really very helpful for me. In my old workplace, yeah, when a boss it was a supervisor, so it's the boss's boss, ask you, okay, Eos, can you do something? Yeah, so all I had to do was say, okay, here's my to-do list. Can you help me figure out a way where I can put that in my timetable? And then you're like, okay, never mind, I'll get someone else to do it. So I really agree on being able to draw that boundaries, being able to stand up for yourself, and if somebody's crossing your boundaries, how do you communicate that to them? And yeah.
Yeah. You communicate. Yeah, I think a lot of times, like in I don't know, in Singapore, in Asia, we tend to just absorb whatever it is, and
Mm,
we're like, okay, you're the boss, I must say yes. But that's not true. Sometimes your boss also doesn't know what your bandwidth is, or they may not have realized that actually your workload is already way more than you can handle, right? So I think it's also, I mean, for me as a as a boss or as a manager, I think it's also important to have this concept of managing your boss, managing
yeah.
upwards. I think as employees or as the person being managed, I think we have this misconception that I just have to accept my environment as it is, right? Because my manager's not doing it, I can't influence the way things are. But then I would actually challenge that and ask, like, what have you actually done to try to change things? And can you and how might you how might you change things, or how might you introduce a kinder environment in a way that's also kind?
Mm. Yeah, thanks for that, Sabrina. Um, yeah, so do you have any other tips for the managers and leaders tuning in? How can they promote a culture of self-kindness in the workplace?
I mean, for me, the easy answer would be to start by being kind to yourself. I think it's really important to learn how to be kind to yourself so that that experience will enable you to be kinder to others as well. That goes back to the concepts of like being of empathy, of compassion. So not just being able to like put yourself in the shoes of others, or putting yourself like being able to understand how your colleagues are feeling, but also putting that into more tangible actions that are productive for people's well-being. But I'd love to hear from Paris or Eos. What do you think the
Yeah,
leaders need to do?
Clarice.
Mm, I think sorry. I think it's great um for leaders to really like ask. I think it's a really important question, like asking what's your bandwidth to an employee. I think that really helps because like, on a personal level, as like a people pleaser, someone also have a hard time saying no when Seb or like EOS ask me like, okay, what's your bandwidth? That really helps. Um, yeah, I think it takes a lot of like awareness and intention when it comes to being kind. So when you start being kind to yourself, you realize that other people other people need that kind of kindness also. Yeah. So and then I guess uh maybe one tip to start being kind to yourself is to perhaps write down all your accomplishments, like maybe even the smallest ones. So I learned this from Sabrina and also my therapist. So especially like someone like me, when you think like, okay, there's a lot, I'm always busy, I don't know whether I'm doing enough. When you write down your smallest accomplishments, this really helps to put things into perspective. And one thing I recently started doing is I have this folder on my desktop, sitting on my desktop, where I screenshot all the nice things that people say, and then I keep it there, and it helps to remind me that okay, I'm doing good. Yeah. So I think maybe this is something that leaders can start doing themselves, and then maybe like pass this on to like their team members to cultivate this whole like self-kind self-kind attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I love that. Maybe I should start having my own victory log.
We have a
Yeah.
team
Mm.
one, by the way,
Oh
somewhere,
yeah,
which we should
somewhere.
continue.
Yes. I think for me, what managers can do, I think we've talked about this, Sabrina, before, approaching situations with curiosity. If somebody doesn't meet a deadline, or somebody doesn't meet your expectations as a manager, instead of judging straight away, maybe approach it with curiosity. Is there something underlying why they're not productive, right? So for example, there was a time where I didn't meet deadlines, a deadline, quite an important deadline, and Sabrina was not very happy with me. Where, yeah, um, no, it's okay. And it made sense, right? Because I promised the deadline. an employee promises a deadline, as a manager, you expect someone to meet that deadline. And I think what was useful was, at the end of the day, finding out that actually I was like this because I was, grieving some. So I recently lost my dog, and it was a 14-year-old family dog, and I was also grieving a past death of a loved one, very close to me. So it was a very tough time, and I think I didn't recognize that. But when the question was asked, like, well, why isn't why aren't your deadlines being met? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, wait, why am I not meeting my deadlines? Instead of um you know like, okay, I guess what other bosses could have done was straight away to attack, or not say attack, but I guess judge, right? So because of that conversation, I also had more time to process, and then so the following week I was able to come to work with a better processed mental health headspace. So I think that was really eye-opening for me, as a manager. What different managing styles could look like, and there was a managing style that was quite productive. Yeah. So tips.
Yeah, no, thanks, Eos, actually for sharing that. That's a good one that sometimes I'm not aware of, so but I do. But yeah, I think it's similarly. I think one of the things is that as a leader or manager, it's very easy to I don't know to villainize or to judge. When something's not going your way, when someone's not performing the way that you're hoping. um, I find that oftentimes it's not so much the skills that are lacking, but I think it's really important for us to actually take a step back and ask and try to understand what the bigger picture is. So one of the questions that someone could ask is also, what's is there anything that's been bothering you lately outside of work, right? So that actually can give you some perspective as to what's going on in the person's mind, right? As people who are working in that workplace environment, we're not only our work self, but we're also our personal real life self, right? We're just all in one. So I think it's very important not to judge, although it can be hard not to, especially when you're very personally invested in something, right? If it's something that's got a lot at stake, of course you're gonna be like upset about it. But it's also about being able to manage your own emotions, and then just slowing down and trying to understand what's the most productive way to work through it. And oftentimes being kind is actually part of the answer.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sabrina. Yeah, I'm aware of time. Just to conclude before we go into the Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A, or just type them below in the chat. So I guess in conclusion, being kind to ourselves is actually very essential for our well-being, productivity, and overall happiness. And some of the things we talked about today is like self-kindness is not that you're lazy, it's not that you're weak, it's not that you're self-indulgent. I think real self-kindness is being able to stand up for yourself, being able to look at things more realistically. You're not too far away from the reality, right? And some of the benefits of self-kindness is that you're actually more productive, you're more satisfied, and actually you're more healthy, right? And again, there's so many practices that we can do. We can start off by being self-aware, asking for help, and things like that. So I really want to thank everyone for their participation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. So the first question is, where does one inner critic come from? Sabrina, Clarice?
Horace?
I think my inner critic comes from, like, I think a lot of it came from like my childhood. um I remember quite clearly that my parents used to say, okay, so for context, I don't think they are like super confident, you know, they too also have their own like harsh inner critic. So then it translates into like, oh, they will tell my sister and I, they're like things like, oh, you know, having you two are the only, like this is the only thing that I'm like proud of. Like so this kind of translate into like me thinking that, okay, I have to do this, I have to be perfect, I have to, you know, do all these things so that I can make my parents proud, because like that responsibility is now on my shoulder because there's nothing else that they are proud of. So then that really like kind of snowballed and, you know, surfaced into this whole harsh inner critic that I have, like the fear of disappointment, you know, I have to like do things perfectly and things like that. So I guess like that's kind of where my own self inner critic comes from. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you guys, like how did it start, or like do you remember a certain event that happened that, you know, made you have this inner critic?
It feels like we need to both create another talk around this.
Yeah.
A quick answer for me would be yeah, I think my inner critic came from, you know, judgmental voices in my life. So I've had a couple of teachers who have just been really judgmental publicly of my ability to do a few things. So I think with that critical voice also comes a lot of shame or guilt from me.
Mm.
Those are the feelings that are attached to it. In one of my therapy sessions, so my therapist had this approach called internal family systems, and with this approach, I actually was able to identify who was that loud critical voice, like what it looked like, and yeah, oftentimes it actually resembled those teachers, or actually even my mom. I hope she's not listening, um, because they would actually just express themselves in a way that's critical, right? And what I've learned is that it's usually because they themselves may be critical or harsh towards themselves, and that's what they project outwardly, obviously without intending to hurt me or hurt anyone. So over time, I feel I'm a lot more compassionate towards these things, but it still hurts, right? So it is what it is. But it's important to be aware of it.
Thanks for that. We do have a question. How do you stop the ruminating and overthinking? Sabrina.
So I'm overthinking now. uh, it's not. It's hard. It's hard when you're in that, you know, in that, I guess, spiral, right? Especially when I'm anxious or depressed, it can go. It can be really loud. So I think two things that help are, you know, when I go for therapy or when I go for coaching, being able to talk about it and process it with someone else who's there to hold space and not like give advice, like to just hear me out and help me rethink or reframe my thoughts, actually help me a lot. I find that when I'm in that overthinking state, I tend to ask myself a lot of like, why is it like that? Why? Why? You know, why me? Why is the world like that? You know? But what I found to be a more productive way of thinking is actually to ask myself, okay, like it's more about what and how questions. So what can I do about this? How does this affect me, and what can I do to move this thing forward, right? So I think changing the questioning or the internal dialogue or monologue to some place that's a little bit more productive in nature, because the language actually matters a lot, and that's what's going on in your head, right? So I think that's one way to help myself um, think more productive thoughts, and also another way to slow down my thoughts has been through writing. I can catch my thoughts that way, and also through either just, you know, from a physiological level, either meditating or even like going on a walk or exercising, that kind of calms me down a bit. So that's helped.
Mm. I'm
Thanks
gonna
for
I'm
that.
gonna I'm gonna
Yeah.
chime in and also say that personally for me, I think having a like support system is really key. So like I always besides going for therapy, I also have like my sister and my best friend who's always there to kind of like catch my like overthinking or like, you know, like this negative like framing, negative perspective. And I think earlier I kind of like brought up the about like me feeling that, you know, why am I not thinking in a certain way? Why am I not doing enough? Why am I expecting so much of myself? And then my best friend once told me that, you know, in terms of like work, right? Why are you criticizing yourself and expecting yourself to be able to do things and think like someone in like the management level? Like they are someone with like years and years of experience, you know, you're only just starting out. So I thought that that was like pretty freeing. Of course, that's not to say that, you know, with this thought that I stop myself from learning, but it's just more of like pacing myself. You know, I'm not expecting myself to fly when I can only when I just started walking. Yeah, so this this kind of reframe helps me to pace myself. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm on the right track. I'm still growing, I'm still learning. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think personally, I also have trouble with, ruminating and overthinking. Um, so what I like to do is to calm myself down, because often when I find that I am ruminating or overthinking, I get very anxious to the point where I could be hyperventilating because because I also have anxiety. So what was taught to me by a therapist or counselor was that it's called a butterfly hug. So basically, you try to cross your arms and make sure, sorry, you can't really see, make sure your arm is as straight as possible. So you can try this now. Make sure that your arm is straight as possible. And then your two fingers will touch your collarbone. So just at the collarbone, right? So when you're breathing, so you breathe in, and then when you're breathing out, make sure you're trying to press your chest down. So a lot of the force is from the where it intersects. So you breathe in, and then you breathe out, and then you're pressing it down. And you can do this a couple of times. It's meant to slow your heart rate down, um, especially when when it gets quite bad. And then what you can also do is you can tap your collar, the clavicle area there. You can tap it. I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I do feel like I'm being hugged right now. Yeah. So that's one way I can I try to stop myself from that, because when you're getting a hug, all you can think about is getting a hug. Or it's really about meditating, focusing on the present, because again, overthinking is usually you're focusing on the past or you're focusing on the future, right? So trying to ground myself in that present moment, and tell myself that I'm here, I'm safe, I'm okay right now, and then move forward. Yeah, we have another question. I'm wondering, how do we know whether we are improving? Because I still feel anxious and uncomfortable over the same triggers. Oh, that's a hard question. Um, Sabrina.
Why do I get the hard one?
Yeah.
I mean, this is definitely something that I've gone through myself on a more personal level. Um, how do we know whether we're improving? I think one of the ways that I've learned to chart my improvement when it comes to whether it's anxiety or depression is that I I've stuck with like the same therapist for a while, so my therapist can actually tell me that I'm improving. But I also have been journaling over the years actually, and once in a while I actually look back. Maybe I might look at like what I wrote 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I actually see that my thought patterns have changed for the better. So I guess the question is, how can you document your process, right? Because I think a lot of the time in this journey of whether it's self-improvement or to heal from grief or anxiety, depression, we're impatient to reach perfection or the outcome. I think it's very important for us to kind of document and check in with ourselves during the journey. So whether it's journaling or talking to someone about it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think therapy, if you can afford it, has been really helpful. Otherwise, there are other other support systems, other mental health resources that you can use. Oh wow, okay, we have a few more questions. So maybe we'll just take one more question. Yeah. What's the best way to take a mental off day, especially when you have ran out of leaves? Uh, that's that's the difficult question because if you don't have leaves, then your
Then
next
you take a
choice would
sick
be
day.
unpaid. Yeah, sick day.
Yeah, I think we need to normalize taking mental health days as part of your sick leave.
MC. Yeah.
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 Because, yeah, if you're mentally unwell, you can't work. It's the same thing as when you're having a fever, right?
Mm,
So I think it's about allowing ourselves to take that those sick leaves off. I mean, I think from an employer standpoint, um, basically when they've built out the number of, like, I guess, holidays that you can get plus that sick leave, that is the threshold that they would accept, I guess.
mm,
So I guess beyond that, it would be about possibly talking to your boss about it and saying that, hey, maybe there are days where I'm not going to operate 100%. What can that look like from a more practical standpoint? Do I take just half a day, but I can still do some work throughout the day? Or if in some cases we might have to be like hospitalized for 2 weeks or something, right? I think just having an open conversation with your boss about it, or at least trying, could be a good first step. Because ultimately, it's really it's about you managing your relationship with your work as well as with your manager. So it's a two-way conversation.
I think I'd just like to add on to that because I think I was also in that position where I didn't have any more leaves. Um, so the next best thing that you could also do, if you can, would be to be very intentional about your weekends and the type of rest that you're getting. Because sometimes staying in bed all day actually will make you feel more tired. And actually intentionally planning out your weekend to do things that you like, and to do things that will really re-energize you. So yeah, so that's my take. I'm so sorry to the people that we haven't to the questions that were left unanswered, but if you have any dying questions that you want answered, feel free to email us. um, till then, we hope that you can join our next event. So we are running our Calm Circles, which is a monthly peer-to-peer sharing circle. If you want, you can join us. It's happening on the 7th and 22nd February. Please also fill up our exit survey, so that we can make our next talks better. And if you want to bring mental health conversations like this to your workplace, please leave your email in the survey or drop us an email at hello@calmcollective.asia. Yeah. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in our next events. Remember that being kind to yourself is not a sign of weakness or self-indulgence. It's a sign of self-awareness and strength. Yeah. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
You can stop recording. Okay.